Bueno, es que en Canarias últimamente estamos viendo protestas de todo tipo contra los plátanos, contra los turistas, contra el petróleo. No sé muy bien qué generación de riqueza quieren llevar a cabo en las islas y están en contra de todo. Pero bueno, ese es otro debate.
Otro directo.
Hablando de islas, y esto también para Brian, en ocasiones Brian ha alabado, con matices, ha alabado el modelo económico de Singapur. Y en Singapur el régimen de tenencia de vivienda es fundamentalmente estatal, ¿no? Una especie de alquiler a 100 años vista. ¿Cuál es decir, ¿por qué no ir por esa dirección? ¿Cuál es el inconveniente de ese modelo de vivienda? Voy a preguntar esto en inglés porque question is not regarding the density of population in Singapore, but the regime of property in Singapore, because most houses are government owned, or at least they are leases for 99 years. So
yes.
What is the advantage or disadvantage of that regime? Why we shouldn't copy that model? Because many people is defending to import that model into, for instance, into Spain, that everything is owned by the government and it is leased for 1 century, but then it goes back to government. Why shouldn't we embrace that model?
Right. Okay. So now I understand what you're talking about. I mean, the most obvious thing is to say it barely makes a difference whether you own something forever or 99 years. If you've ever done the math where you just calculate what's the value of owning something for the next 99 years versus forever, it's actually a very small difference. You've got to know a bit of calculus to understand as to what the disadvantage is. What's the disadvantage of getting government involved in a vital industry, which means that it is even easier for them to go and mess it up. Now, I will say Singapore is an especially reasonable and low corruption country where when government is involved, they don't screw things up as badly as they would in, say, the United States or Spain. But still, there's problems and there's risks. But for other countries that are not well functioning, that are not good at handling corruption problems, to go and try to copy it, it's like the best case scenario is it barely makes any difference. And more likely what happens is you wind up putting additional problems in front of the second most important industry in the world. Right? The first most important industry in the world is food. That's the most important. If you can only have one, have food. But the second most important is shelter, housing. And yet this is one where people are so hostile to building and are so likely to demonize people just for doing the job of putting a roof over our heads. And why? It's pretty hard to understand. And yet it is a popular dogma all around the world. Developers are evil and have to be stopped.
Esto también lo voy a preguntar en inglés porque creo que es un tema. But I want to link this with your discussion, your paper against Georgism, because what's the reason why we should allow owners of a house to earn monopolistic rents instead of sharing socially that public dividend on housing? I mean, what's the social value of being owners of a house when we could be just tenants?
Right. Okay. So I didn't see the Georges connection, but now I know what you're talking about here. All right. Yeah. So there is this idea. Wouldn't it be great if we were just to go and tax all of the raw value of all real estate? So you can say you don't want to tax the building because then people wouldn't build. But what's the harm in going and taxing the raw value of the land? All right, just to start, it's like, well, then the government gets it, and what is the government going to do with it? I'd say it's much better to keep it in the hands of the private owners so they don't go and waste it on stuff. But anyway, what I say in that paper is that the main thing that people forget is that the valuable properties that people think of as being the land often have to be discovered. So think about prospecting for oil. It's easy to say, well, once we know that there's 1 million barrels of oil under your land, why should we allow you to drill it? It's like, well, maybe the reason that I went around looking for this land was because I expected that I would be able to go and get the benefit from it. And yes, there is quite a bit of research showing that in countries where the owner of property is allowed to get the mineral resources, the mineral value, they seem strangely to have a lot more resources. It's like, well, why would that be? It's like, because the resources have to be discovered. The resources have to be found. So if you go and take that value, then you discourage people from finding the resources that exist. Furthermore, often if you're running a business, like, is that really a great place to build something? You might, after someone succeeds, say, oh, well, of course, it didn't take any brains to do that. And yet when you really pay attention to business, a lot of what's going on in business is someone is saying, I think I could go and take that land and turn it into a stadium that people would want to go to, right? They take a risk. And if they know that if their idea is good, they will lose the value, then what is the point of taking the risk? So that is another big part of it, is just that all entrepreneurship involves trying to guess what the best use of property is. And when you prevent an owner from profiting from it, you discourage guessing. Probably my favorite example of this, so I know Gonzalo from Guatemala. So Guatemala is rich in archaeological resources, like so much of Latin America. And yet the normal thing now is if you find any archaeological relics, the government gets it. Which means, why is there any point in even trying to find anything? The golden age of archaeology was the age when whoever finds the resource goes and owns it, and then they're rich off of it. Or whoever owns the land owns it. But if government is the owner of it, then what's the point of trying to go and find out what value lies beneath the sand? So I have a piece called Privatizing Archaeology. Right? So there's the Indiana Jones line. It belongs in the museum. I said, look, let the museum pay for it if they want it. Why is it that people, hardworking people who go around looking for archaeological treasures, shouldn't be able to make money like everybody else?
I would like to add something related with what Brian is talking about.
Puedes hacerlo en español.
No, but I would like to do it in English too. Be careful how you divide the ownership or the private property right. Because if you divide too much and you include regulation with urban planning, you will have an anti-common problem. So it will be very difficult to reshape the city. So private property rights are essential because you need incentive to transform the city. But if you divide into a great amount of parts the ownership, and you add too much regulation as we have today, the cost of reshaping the city is really high. I don't know what you think about that, Brian.
Right. Anti-commons problems are theoretically interesting. I mean, the most obvious example, I once was in an apartment complex where every parking space was assigned to an owner, and therefore it was almost impossible to ever have a guest visit you because, and I said, well, it would be better to go and just have a much larger, have a lot of the spaces just be unassigned. And then it's not like everyone is going to have their friends come at the same time. So I thought that would have been better. But again, in the real world, I don't think that anti-commons problems are actually very important. There are opportunities for developers to go and buy up larger areas to go and handle these problems. But yes, I don't think that it is actually anywhere near in severity to the opposite problem of not owned by anyone or owned by the government and then just mismanaged.
My point is, if you have divided into many parts the ownership in some area where there are many houses, and you add, for example, regulations with urban planning where you cannot increase the density of the city, so you destroy the incentive, and you also destroy the possibilities of reshaping. So the division of the ownership plus the regulations will lock the city. That is the point. So it will be very difficult that new builders will go to this area to buy each apartment, each house, to rebuild or to reshape the area. So it will be, the consequence will be I don't know how to say in English now, but something like, degenerado, un lugar degenerado, obsoleto. So the city will be unprofitable and will reduce the possibility for division of labor and opportunities.
Right. So again, I'll say like theoretically possible, but I don't see it really mattering very much in the real world. Sure. If you wanted to go and build skyscrapers in San Francisco, it would be easier if there was one landlord who owned every city block, and then you could just go to that landlord and buy the block and then evict everyone and put your skyscraper. That would make it easier. But I'd say in the real world, if it were just possible for developers to go to individual owners and buy it up, we would have a lot more development than we do right now. So I don't think that that really is that big of a problem. So in the United States, we do have homeowners associations. They do provide some valuable services, but I think that you'd be likely to actually get more development without homeowner associations, because then you just go and find the owners that are most eager to sell. Whereas to go and buy out a homeowner association, you would have to convince a majority of people in the homeowners association. So it's just easier generally if you can go and shop around and say, well, there's 100 owners. I need to buy from 10 of you. I don't care which 10. That's easier than going and convincing a majority of a whole group to go and sell to you. So that would be my story anyway. There are advantages when a developer gets one large area and then they can simultaneously build all of it. But I don't see that the division of property in urban areas is an important barrier to development. The problem is government won't let even an individual owner sell to a developer. And again, there are a lot of tactics that developers can use in a decentralized area, like you buy options, where you go to every owner and I'll say, I'll pay you $1,000 just for the right to go and buy this if I feel like it later on. And then you go and you just get a lot of options. And once you have the options, then you can go and look at, out of all my options, which one is the best. So it doesn't even cost that much to go and handle problems like this. So I just don't think it's that severe.
I agree that the problem is the regulations. But
yes.
Can we agree that sometimes how the ownership is organized will facilitate, will increase?
Right. It would be so definitely you could make it easier, but I'd say, look, if you were free to go and buy from any owner in San Francisco and build whatever you wanted on property you bought, we would be seeing a lot of skyscrapers getting built.
Never gonna fly, straight into the